The evaluation of our long-term facility plan alternatives, and just to remind everyone, not only the board, but our audience out there, as practice of the board, we don't do anything in a very rushed manner. We're pretty deliberate. We take a lot of time. Sometimes we take a lot longer than others. So I'd just like to kick this off with going back through the history a little bit and what has brought us to where we are today. So I'd like to take everybody back to September 2014. We started to have some spacing issues, and we had an internal assessment done by JLL to identify the facilities management strategy to maximize utilization of our current space. An optimization strategy was recommended that would increase occupancy in our existing headquarters and accommodate for growth for an additional 3 years at that time, or would bring us to 2019. Knowing that we needed to seriously look at the problem of needing added space, the board added the long-term facilities planning on our 15-16 work plan. In April and July of 2016, with the continued engagement of JLL, staff reported to the board the possible long-term alternatives available to CalSTRS. Some of those recommendations or the alternatives were to provide, staff provided considerations and alternatives to the board to contemplate, including completing phase 2 of our original headquarters development plan here at our current campus. The board asked for detailed information on our projected growth, financial analysis, and preliminary budget, and other cost considerations to be brought back to the November 2016 with a recommendation to expand our current facility. And actually, I think I'm reading from the original copy that I had, so let me go to the one that's printed out, because I changed some of my language. So at the November meeting, the board was presented with a recommendation to approve the headquarters expansion with an initial estimated budget of $181 million for external construction and finishing costs. At that meeting, the board approved continuing exploration of quantitative and qualitative analysis of the alternatives to buy, build, or lease space. We also approved appropriating the $181 million to be set aside in the building fund, but we only authorized the expenditure of $8 million for the initial design phase, while other long-term options can be considered over the span of a couple years. Within a year, staff started to see the construction needs, costs, and et cetera were escalating. Worried about putting off returning to our long-term facilities discussion for another year, Sharon and I asked the board to not wait for the full 2 years that was talked about in November of 2016, but to begin exploration of our previously approved ideas a year earlier than planned, and the board agreed. Since then, the board has been engaged in evaluating the details of information provided by staff, providing ideas for additional consideration, bond financing, additional options, design considerations, and evaluation. At the July 2018 meeting, staff provided the board with an update on the financial analyses of all the long-term alternatives and an overview of the initial design for the expansion option. An additional request was that we explore opportunities for bond financing. At the September 2018 meeting, JLL provided a recommendation that the board select the headquarters expansion option as a long-term facility solution. In preparation for their final decision at the November board meeting, the board asked staff to address 8 additional elements that have been provided in today's agenda. So the majority of us here today have been engaging on this issue for its consideration in its entirety, for the duration of it being presented, with only a few having been here a smaller but still substantial portion of time. Give you my opinion. Recommending putting this decision off till a later date puts us on a board that'll be facing several new members without the same experience or knowledge that we have. This board as a whole will not be better or more informed on this agenda item ever. We can make our decision today. I believe it's important that we do so. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, or in this case, prudent. Good governance requires a focus on prudent process, but it doesn't require a perfect outcome. Step back and ask yourselves, was this a good, prudent overall process leading up to the decision today? And make your assessment through the lens of the board's values of inclusiveness, fairness, impartiality, and welcoming of diverse views and alternatives. You can tell we've been at it a long time. All right, Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're going to then turn it over to Lisa, correct? And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dylan. Thank you. You know, as CEO here, and you hold me accountable for the implementation of the strategic plan for this organization. This is an essential part of that plan. So I want to make sure you hear from my voice just how important this is to the organization and just some of my observations of where we are with this. Harvey is going to deliver your fiduciary training tomorrow during the governance committee, but I think that's a good starting point just for, again, discussing how we think about this project. All of you are fiduciaries for all of our investment transactions, not just this one. But the vast majority, almost nearly all investment transactions are delegated to staff. I asked Mike Drays in the back of the room, and I asked Mike yesterday, well, how many buildings, properties actually do we directly control here as an organization? Not through joint funds, but that we are in charge of. And he said over 400 properties we have in our portfolio, represents about 65% of our real estate portfolio that require extraordinary work, detail, oversight, et cetera. But those are delegated transactions. I think we recognize as staff, and I know you do, that dealing with the headquarters buildings does entail issues that directly impact the heart of the organization. And it does deserve your involvement and oversight. It is different than just another real estate transaction in our portfolio. One of the great things we always say about our organization and the board is that you have a long history here in this organization with board governance. Not just as activists in corporate governance, but making sure you do it well yourself. And we've always had a very good definition of what your role is and what role the staff plays in operationalizing the plan. So as fiduciaries around in a project like this, certainly no one expects you to become experts in recycled carpets or how to manage a gray water or black water system. You don't want to learn about that, trust me, management system in a building. So when we're discussing a $300 million project like this, like you always hear in your fiduciary presentation every year, you have to have a body of experts that put this together for you, and you have to listen to them and understand their work in the project. We've not said this to you this way on this project before, but I want to make sure you know the experts that have been involved, because Lisa has often been the face of this transaction with you and presenting all the work of many people before you. But just to mention this specifically, in addition to her team, which we'll introduce at some point here, and Giselle is the lead on our internal facilities team on this project, you've listened to your feasibility consultant go through the various scenarios these last times, and that's JLL. Ridge Capital is your construction management firm, and they were with us, those key individuals, when constructing this building, so we have that expertise. Your general contractor is DPR Construction. Your architects are two firms, ZGF out of Portland and Lionakis out of Sacramento. Your mechanical engineers are PAE. Your financial advisors are Montague DeRose, and your bond counsel is Kevin Savali. That's a lot of experts. A lot of advice you're getting on all aspects of this. And again, please remember, this is not like old-time architectural projects where you get together with your architect and do drawings. From day one, you've had a construction company with us every step of the way so that we know what stuff costs. This isn't a theoretical exercise and then we find out some big surprise at the end of the day. Second point is about benchmarking. We have lots of good benchmarking data here for you, and I think it's important to have benchmarking data. We talked about that at the last board meeting. It's a guidepost. But I think you need to take that data and always think about your specific project and how that is similar or dissimilar. Classic example, parking. Everybody cares about parking, and we've struggled with that ourselves. Do we underpark the building? Do you have too much parking? What's the right amount? What does the future look like? So you're gonna look at benchmarks when you do parking. How much does it cost per stall to build a parking garage? And there's a lot of numbers out there that we can share with you on that type of thing. But always remember, once you get these benchmarks, you need to think about your specific project, especially around transportation. So regardless of the cost of a parking stall, you need to know, well, if we underpark the facility, where will people park? If all the parking around us is 90 minutes in the city streets, where will they go? Will they park across the bridge? Will they park in Sacramento? Will it take 15 minutes to walk? Will they take public transportation? All those things are important variables to ground you in that parking metric. So remember where we are today. We're not across the river. If any of you go out tonight and wait on the corner for the yellow bus to take you home, you'll be here tomorrow morning. There will be no bus to take you home. There is no light rail station within inside of this building. Now, there's plans for different things that will help us in the future, for sure. But there is not voluminous choices around when you get to do a parking garage. So we know parking's expensive, and it is part of a lot of the discussion on this project has been around that. So again, benchmarks provide you general guidance, and you absolutely should look at them, but you need to think about them. But I would say, from my view, the most important benchmark on this project is the building you're sitting in right now. The expansion building that we're talking about here is meant to carry forth a similar quality than we're in. No leaner, no plusher. It's meant to be like this building, but it's also meant to embrace those things in sustainability, energy management, all the good things that will be in the benefits of the future for buildings. It's meant to bring those into the next facility because this is 10 years old, so a lot has changed. So again, I think you should think about benchmarking, but also be prudent when you're looking at that kind of data. And final point, and now just some conclusion comments. If you make this decision, the recommendation we're offering you today, we would come back with two things with you. One is the details on bond financing, and again, we're so pleased that we had the suggestion from the board to pursue that. It was our job at this point to make sure that it was legal and that it could be done, and we now have done that. So you have adequate evidence that that can be part of approving the project, but we also have to come back with details on how it will work, and we will certainly do that. And the second point, just like we did in building this building, if we greenlight the construction of this, we need to talk about how your oversight changes from just approving a project in general terms, approving the budget, which is what we're talking about today, and actually providing some more direct oversight. And we've got some models from what we used last time that were successful, but we certainly want to do what makes you feel comfortable in the project going forward. There's a lot of ways to do that. Yesterday in the investment committee, you have a very aggressive agenda and some real opportunity to change how we do investing in this organization. But you've heard from Chris's voice and things that you heard that this organization is restricted in a number of ways by the state of California and various control agencies on how we do procurement, on how we do budgeting, on how we do human resource practices. And some of those things will impede our success. There is no doubt about that. There may be some ways to change some of those through statutory changes or through diplomatic discussions with some of those agencies. So I don't want to say there isn't opportunity there to change those things, but it will be hard work. What's refreshing about today's discussion is this decision is entirely in our hands. This is our decision how we want to shape tomorrow's success at the organization. Karen, you asked yesterday on one of the items in corporate governance, do you have enough resources to do this? Remember? Whenever the board asks that question, I think we're often guilty of translating that question into how many staff members it takes to do that. And we kind of translate that into it. But I tell you, if we took a deeper discussion around that, all the managers and executives that are behind me in this room would tell you the toughest thing to do here, especially in state government, but in the future, is not the number of bodies, but who's filling those seats and the talent. It is absolutely about talent acquisition. And you've got to make a decision here if you're going to be just like another state agency and follow traditional state ways of looking at things, or whether you want to achieve the agenda that's been put forth for this organization. We are absolutely at a crossroads of that. We can recruit people from across the river. Can you recruit people from Chicago, from New York, from Singapore, from London? Are you going to create the environment here where we can be successful? So what I would suggest is that we all need to think hard about the future here. I would not look out the window and look at the buildings across the river. Those environments, those work environments that you see, the buildings that you see, those are the buildings of the past. Those are not the work environments of the future that will make us successful. So, put on your 3D glasses when we think about this, use your imagination, but we have a chance to make this an opportunity for this organization for decades, not something from the past. So I would recommend we proceed with the building and build it. All right, I will now for the details.
I understand that some of our consultants have had to make flight arrangements
They have.
because we didn't do this earlier. We switched our agenda around. So I'd just like to express the board's thanks that they were able to do so and were willing to do so. Thank you very much.
Well, that was such a great tee-up. So what I'm going to try to do is make our points pretty succinct if we can. So at the September meeting, the financial and qualitative components of all three alternatives were provided to the board, and Jones Lang LaSalle, our contractor, provided a recommendation that we move forward with the expansion of our existing headquarters as the long-term alternative. Also during that meeting, staff provided initial information regarding the feasibility of bond financing and the favorable impact it could have on the expansion and acquisition alternatives based on our initial research. The board at that time recommended partnering with a bond financial advisor to further investigate the impacts on bond financing using all of the necessary data points. Additionally, a request was made to run a financial NPV analysis on a fourth alternative, and that was to lease for 10 years and expand our current facility at that point in time. So today, Giselle and I will be summarizing the key points related to those additional scenarios and the additional questions that were asked by the board, and hoping to bring this to some conclusion with providing you the answers that you're looking for. And so Dana, I'm asking you this at this point. We really would like to go through each topic individually, and then pause to ask for questions before we go on to the next topic. I think it might just keep the conversation flowing well, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so we're going to start with bond financing. Utilizing bond financing improved the financial variance for the expansion by $55 million, narrowing the delta between this option and the lowest cost alternative to $10 million over a 30-year period. So remember, the lease-only strategy was $161 million, and expansion using bond financing brought that to $171. So we now have a $10 million delta over 30 years. So with me is Michael Kramer with Montague DeRose, and I'm going to turn it over to him. He's going to introduce himself, and he's going to provide you the data that went into that analysis.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Michael Kramer with Montague DeRose and Associates. This is my first time before the board, so if I take a minute to just my background and of the firm as well. So the firm was founded in 1995 by Doug Montague. Our clients are exclusively public sector or nonprofit clients. As bond advisors or municipal advisors, our main task is to assist our clients with the bond financing process, advising them on finding the best cost of capital that fits their needs. So since 1995, the firm has advised on over $200 billion of public sector financings in the state. I have worked in public finance since 1995 myself and have been an advisor for over 20 years, working in California. So, and recently I worked with the city of Sacramento on the Golden One financing in downtown. I was the advisor on that transaction. And also we just closed a transaction for the city that's going to expand the convention center. That's also just closed recently as well. So if I may, so our analysis was in attachment 2 to the board item. I will just touch on a few high-level topics on that and be ready for other questions on those items. So we were tasked with looking at the viability of bond financing for the expansion acquisition options. So we made some assumptions that are shown on page 2 of our attachment. We presume the bonds will be issued and repaid over 30 years. And based on we assume the credit ratings that tie to interest rates, we're looking at Moody's A1, S&P A+, which are very good ratings. We're focused primarily on tax-exempt financing, which does reduce the cost by quite a bit. But we also looked at a taxable option on the acquisition should a certain portion of the facility be deemed to be non-qualified for exempt purposes. We ran the taxable option as well. But our focus is on the tax-exempt options also. So again, most of the financing cost, debt service is tied to the credit rating assumption. And the interest rates we used were as of October 1st. We took those market rates and we added 50 basis points, 0.5%, to those for the scenarios where the bonds are issued next July. There was a scenario where the expansion would happen 10 years from now. For those, we took current market rates and added 1 full percent to that. We have a fair degree of certainty of where rates may be within 6 months from now. However, looking out 10 years, that's a very tough call. I can really no better forecast where rates are going to be in 10 years and where they're going to be in 50 years, given how many economic cycles we could have between now and 10 years. So we also made other assumptions regarding capitalized interest and financing costs. So our debt service figures and the net present value of those figures are laid out on pages 4 and 5, and the debt service costs were fed into the JLL model to get to the total NPV figures that are in the staff report. Thank you.
No questions, okay.
This makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have a lot of questions about this, but they're not appropriate at this level. But I just want to make sure, Michael, that on your last page, the row for net debt service, that's what your input was. All of the other elements on that page, the last page, lease expansion and acquisition cash flows, all those other numbers came from Lisa and her project team, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Sure.
Thanks, Dana. I just want to make sure I understand that the $55 million number in terms of savings. Is it correct for me to think that by pursuing the project using bond financing, the cost of the project is reduced by $55 million?
It's not the cost of the building, but it's the comparison, it's the cost
We
of.
reduce the cost.
Correct.
Thank you.
Over the next 30 years.
Okay, thanks.
Clears our speaking list.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to move on now to the additional alternative, and that was to, thank you. That was to lease for 10 years and then build the building at that point in time. So that analysis was handed over to JLL, and they did an NPV analysis that was completed on this option. There was a 3% inflation rate that was assumed as to what the building would cost in 10 years. That drove the cost of the building to $403 million. That amount was then fed into the NPV results, and the NPV results on that particular option achieved a slightly lower NPV over 30 years, but when applying the bond financing, this option is more expensive by $24 million. So again, if we're looking at the expansion utilizing bond financing, this alternative is more expensive. There was a suggestion that the land appreciation should either be removed or applied across all alternatives, since the land would appreciate regardless of whether there was a structure built on it or not. So working with JLL, we did elect to pull out the appreciation from the NPV, and it did increase the NPV from 226 to 229. So it made a $3 million difference. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that we did do that. I do also want to mention some drawbacks of this scenario. The assumptions that were made under this scenario, as Michael mentioned, the bond rate is the prediction of the bond rate is very strained. So it's really hard to predict whether that's a good bond rate or not. The other factor that's strained is the inflation rate. So we're assuming a 3% inflation rate over the next 10 years, but it's really hard to predict what the construction market's going to do between now and then. So we don't know what the actual costs would actually be incurred on this particular scenario. There would be a disconnect of organizational and operational continuity by moving staff to another site. That's no different than the lease-only strategy. And And currently, there's only a few leasing alternatives in the downtown market that would even have a block of space big enough for what we need initially. So nothing in the 40 or 50,000 square foot range. It's really all in the 30,000 square foot range. And whatever group would move off in this scenario, we would need more space for them at the onset. So I think that's definitely a risk. And this is a snapshot in time, so it's hard to say where we'd be in a year and a half, but that's where we're at right now. And then I think the final point that I'd like to point out to you, and I'm actually going to read this verbatim. This came from Sherilyn Hamilton, who is the Director of Community Development for the City of West Sacramento, and she's actually here in the front row today. The risk around the development is, although the city is supportive of a DA extension request, so if we were to run this scenario, it would be 10 years where we would actually exercise our entitlement rights. They're supportive of the DA extension request, but have cautioned about the length of extension related to some of the terms contained in the current DA. An extension request is a public process with hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council. The outcome cannot be predicted until the public process is complete. It is also not clear at this point if the length of extension request or any change to terms would trigger additional environmental review, especially concerning the guarantee of water capacity to serve Phase 2. And our water rights are what they've said all along is our biggest risk. There is a lot of development that's in the pipeline right now along the riverfront, and the city would not be able to hold our water capacity rights that we have in our development agreement for that long. So I think that's a really important risk. And that's all I have on this particular scenario, so I'll pause to see if there's any questions.
Anyone? Betty? There you go.
Great, thank you. First of all, Lisa, thank you for bringing the scenario forward. And was really out of concern about our ability to deal with the vacancy of the building and looking at this, but appreciate the difficulty about how to cost this out, given a lot of uncertainties around inflation and other costs. I guess I want to speak to this with respect to the other options. And part of what I'm, I guess, concerned about, and I'm prepared to support something today, but in the past, when I brought up staffing needs, I guess what's also really hard to project out is just how the nature of our work is going to change. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, but let's say we adopt an option today, that it's the 2019 expansion option. What ability do we have to come back, and this speaks to Jack's question about oversight going forward, should there be drastic changes with respect to how we as an institution carry out our work, just in terms of how the future of work is changing in all sectors. And then also with respect to transportation needs, innovation in transportation. So at what point do we get to look at that again and reevaluate? And are there kind of natural points in the process going forward to do that?
Well, in the long term, I mean, and again, none of us are that smart enough to know exactly
No,
what's going to
I
happen
understand.
technology-wise and everything like that. But I think what's nice about the model we're doing with you is that this will be a fluid model between tenant and owner that exists. And also, if we build the building as we're proposing, it's a very attractive building for leasing. So if perchance we don't grow at 4%, we grow at 2%, we would be coming back and, I mean, we would certainly be telling you, we would be adjusting the tenant proportionality of the building for sure going forward. I mean, that's our safety valve on this for sure, is that we will fill the building and for investment revenue, on that basis. I mean, that this is no longer just a single owner situation. And that is all of our, I mean, we're concerned about the same thing, of course. And, initial feedback is very positive from the market that, there's just, that would be an attractive offering in the market. Yeah.
And then I guess from, I know that issues have been raised about the optics of approving something like this. And my issue with the optics is not about the fund necessarily. It's really about the rest of state government not having the same ability to look at these options in terms of, space. So maybe this could provide a model going forward, but it is,
Well, if I could, and I hate to say we're special because I know a lot of agencies do very special things. But, when we talk about the people that you see before you and the nature of this business model we're doing, puts us in a different labor market. And I'm viewing this as an investment in the organization, an investment in the staff. And, I've worked in 4 different state governments now in my career, and I would tell you, obviously, the internal labor market of state government generally is the driven source of your staff. But in our business and CalPERS, we are reliant on other types of labor pools. And, as much as I personally do like Sacramento, that alone would not pull someone from London to come to work here. It has to be a work culture and it isn't just about a building either. But we have to be able to provide an attraction to that intellectual capital to bring it in the organization. I don't think we spend enough time recognizing how critical it is, that talent acquisition piece for an organization for us.
and I would agree with that. And I don't think it's just limited to the pension funds. I think that's talent throughout the state government, so.
It is, but our labor market by definition is a wider cut.
I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Harry?
Thanks, Dana. I just want to concur with Betty's comments around the future of the workforce and transportation. I don't think any of us can figure out what that's going to look like. It's probably going to look different. How dramatically, I don't think any of us really know. It's today, it's not going to be, those concerns aren't a hindrance for me going, in the direction I'm leaning in terms of this item. But I don't want us to lose sight of those issues in terms of how we would monitor that going forward, and that we're thoughtful about it in the right places and having the right conversations with the right people in terms of how they're navigating parking. How parking's, we know what the topics are. I think Betty's raised them. I wanted to be on the record to say that I'm thoughtful about those issues as well. I don't have the answers for them. I think there are other more compelling reasons for us to make a decision today. I don't want those 2 concerns to be looked over. I don't think they are, but I wanted to be officially on the record to say that those are issues that I think we need to continue to monitor.
Thank you. So, I hear what Betty and Harry say, and there's a lot of uncertainty here. We don't know. There's a whole lot that we don't know about the future. That's what we do here. We're going to hear from our actuaries about what we don't know about the future, right? I mean, that's the nature of CalSTRS. And so, what do we do when we don't know what's going to happen in the future? We try to mitigate risks. And how do we mitigate risks? We have to pay for risk mitigation. We could try to say, let's take a chance, eliminate those 4 floors of parking that'll cut $26 million out of the project. If you look at the numbers that Michael and his firm have given us, that would reduce our annual costs by about 10%. Take a $300 million project, cut $26 million out of it, that reduces it by about 10%. Well, the annual cost for the debt service is about $19 million, so we would save about $2 million. So we should think about mitigating the risk of a problem with parking, of not having enough parking, as saying, okay, we have to pay for that, and maybe $2 million is a reasonable price to pay given the size of our operation. And so I think we're not going to build the perfect building because we don't know the future. And therefore, what we have to do is we have to build a building that gives us the flexibility if we have too much room to rent it out to other people, but that doesn't leave us with new employees who don't have offices. And we can't attract people, and we can't function, and we can't implement our strategy. So I would just, that's the way I'm looking at it. We've really researched this. We've got a lot of great information about, where we might have saved some money. But the important thing is it's in the context of the fact that we have to make a decision that's going to enable us to work for many, many years. And I've never built a building for a company that I've had some authority over, but I've made lots of leasing decisions for a company that was growing, and it is really hard. And the one thing you don't want to do is end up with not enough space to implement your strategy. So that's the way that's the way I'm looking at it.
Thank you, Paul. That clears our list, Lisa. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic.
We were asked whether the residual value assumptions impact the NPV results. And JLL analyzed building annual depreciation in a range of 1% to 5% and land value appreciation in a range of 1% to 5%. For an expansion, the overall sensitivity range was $23.2 million. And for an acquisition, the overall sensitivity range was $22.1 million. That's all we have on that item. Do you have any questions? Okay. The next thing we were asked was whether, when we would require half of the additional office square footage. And for us, that's about 100,000 square feet. So using our staff growth projections, this would occur in the fiscal year 27-28. The expansion alternative will provide the greatest flexibility to respond to changes in growth patterns, and it allows CalSTRS to respond to growth, adjust the amount of sublease space, and generate lease revenue through the end of our growth needs. It also provides the maximum opportunity alignment of collaborative business areas with the least amount of business disruption. And also remember, any available space will be leased to third parties, generating income for the system. So although we will only need 50% in 27-28, the other 50% will be leased. Any questions? No questions. Okay, next, we were asked to provide some building benchmarks. The first thing we're going to talk about is square footage per person. So CalSTRS density is currently 200 rentable square feet per person. And our goal is a target of 150 to 160 square feet per person for future occupancy. We assume a vacancy of 10%. These metrics fit within national occupancy benchmarks and are considered best practice. Our future space allocations are denser than corporate headquarter benchmarks and other state projects. For any expansion solution, we will design space consistent with progressive organizations that focus less on individual desk size and more on shared opportunities to collaborate or work quietly, depending on the changing needs of individuals and CalSTRS business.
Be referencing the report that we got from Department of Finance and Karen Finn, and I'm sure I can leave it to Jacqueline if she wants to pick up on other things that were in that report, maybe at some appropriate point. But the reason I raise it is because they did a comparison to the building on O Street. So my first question is, and I know you've accommodated the differences, such as they're not having a parking structure and a couple of other things that didn't apply in their instance. But having said that, do you believe it was a fair comparison between the two buildings?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it gets to some of the points that were made in the memo that we were sent by Finance. And in particular, places, I think they were suggesting that there probably could have been more information shared with the board in terms of some of those costs to give us the discretion as to whether or not some things that are probably too far beyond the pale, such as the building facade or the floor plate size. I think they would concede now that those things are probably beyond us to change, given the nature of the project and where it's at. But they've raised other things that they do believe are subject to further consideration. And I want to get your thoughts about that, even if we were to approve the project as it's currently being proposed. So one of the things that they raised were interior finishes and the fact that on a square foot basis, Our proposal is about $33 more per square foot for those things. And so I raise that as only one of a couple of things that they raised, but I want to get your impressions about that and whether there's any sort of wisdom to maybe holding judgment on things like that while still approving the project.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I was actually going to go through the cost benchmarks next.
Okay.
So if it's okay, I'll I'll go through that, and I think that could start to answer some of your questions. So what Giselle did was square footage benchmarks, and so I'm going to talk about cost per square foot. So we were unable to find published benchmarks on the cost of construction for other corporate headquarters or financial institutions. However, we were able to identify that our tenant improvement costs are within the national average. What we found was every project is different and every project has different goals, either from a developer or an occupant perspective. So we did work with DGS to use the O Street project currently underway as a benchmark comparison because it is really the only development right now that we have to compare with in the local area. But there's a couple of things that I want to share with you right off the bat, and that's I think they're important to note. The contracting model used for the O Street project is different than the contracting model that we're utilizing. We are utilizing an integrated project delivery method where the general contractor and the architect are dedicated from pre-construction. So it's not design bid build. We're doing an integrated process where our architect was hired at the same time as our construction partners. And as we're looking at design elements, the construction team is there with 3D modeling saying that's not going to work, or there's another way to do that, or there's a least expensive way to do this. And so it's a very efficient way of delivering a project. Once the target value of not to exceed $300 million was established, our partners must bring that project in within that dollar value. They're contractually obligated to do so. And if there was any design changes or anything that didn't quite work, they're on the hook for those costs. So that should give you some assurance that we're building a project that's going to be within that budget. We're very confident, the entire team is very confident of this. In addition, our budget has $30 million of contingency. That's a lot. So if you remove the $30 million of contingency, the project is now 270. And I'm not saying we can bring the project in at 270, but what I can assure you of is that additional funding is not there for design features. It's not there for us to add something to the project. It's there for market risks and construction risks and those sorts of things. Our project has not been bid out yet. The O Street project has been bid out for over a year. And so that's the biggest risk to our project right now, is to find out what these trades, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing trades, are really going to come in at. So that's what that money is for. So I want to kind of just start with that.
Can I parse that a little bit?
Sure.
Because I think one of the things that I hear you saying is that the nature of the way that we're planning for this project, designing the project, is different than the O Street project. Is that what you're saying? And that therefore maybe all our costs are almost all in versus theirs primarily for, maybe it might be just for designing construction or however they term it at the state level.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think the only thing that I'm trying to say from our perspective is that the way that we've incorporated our delivery model, there's a lower risk for change orders because of the way we're designing it. And it's not the same way that the state does their projects. So.
And I was down, just as this is a total aside, but I'll say it anyway. I was down in Orange County looking at they're building a couple of new administrative buildings. And I think they're employing the same approach that you did, is start with a team and work with them throughout. And they do modeling continuously to see what the building's gonna look like, where the problems exist. And so for that, that may be a better comparison for the way you're doing your project.
And Steve, just so you know, that's how this building was built also.
Okay.
We have great success with it.
In terms of the finished quality, again, the message of the architects is it's meant to be a seamless from this building to that building in terms of the quality of the finishes. So this probably is a bit nicer than a classic state office building. I wouldn't deny that. This is also meant to be a headquarters for an organization, not a multi-tenant building where tenants are moving in and out. And it's meant to be a building that would last a long time and windows won't fall out and other things that happen to buildings that aren't built well. So there are features in this, no doubt, that affect the cost structure. I wouldn't tell you otherwise.
Interior finishes as well?
Interior finishes are, even the furniture we use in this building is meant to be environmentally thoughtful. We've spent a lot of time analyzing furniture and understand what creates a healthy work environment. So I would say the criteria we utilize here is different. It isn't, it's meant to be a productive environment for staff, but most importantly, just as important, is a healthy environment for staff. And that affects the choice of the carpet, the choice of the furniture, heating and air conditioning, all those things have thought put into them in this building. And we envision the same thought would go into a building. We wouldn't build a building less than this and tell staff, now you go over to that building and we'll lease this out. We could never do that. So this is meant to meet our business requirements for this quality. And that probably does affect that cost difference. I don't want to deny it, but we think that meets our business needs.
Okay, can I take from your response, though, and maybe Lisa's response, that the opportunity to come back and look at some of the things that were identified, at least that aren't beyond the pale, is no longer there? That coming back to this board and saying, you know what, we had a chance to look at some of these other costs that we assumed one aspect about, but now we can do it slightly differently and save some money. Are we saying that we're not likely to do that? I just want to better understand what the future holds in terms of potential changes.
The future would move quickly into interior design. There's no doubt about that. So they're using common metrics for having an interior layout that would look like this in quality. But I guess I'd encourage you from a governance standpoint that you need to be comfortable. I would argue that it's most important that you're comfortable for the budget and that you feel it meets our needs, and we have to make it work with that. If you said, that's just not doable, let's do a building for 200, we'd probably come back and say, let's not do it. That just will not meet the needs of this organization. We'd take the lease option, even though we know that would have a lot of implications. So Lisa didn't say this morning, but we started out with a budget much higher than where we are today. We've taken off 30 million already in design issues because we thought it needed to be done in that. So I guess I'd encourage you to stay at an oversight governance level around the budget and not get into
I guess
design.
I rarely ever disagree with you, Jack, but I just will take this moment to say, I think you can have both. I think you can set an overall budget level and yet hold out the possibility that maybe there are things you find in the actual delivery and also that you pursue as part of, and I'm just referring to the finance letter, that you pursue that could ultimately reduce that cost. And yet, if by chance you find that you can't achieve these things, or you come back to the board and say, we don't think that's a smart thing to do, but at least the board is engaged in a discussion, oh yes, we agree with that.
I agree with that entirely.
And so, again, I'm not arguing that we lower the budget to reflect any of this at this point.
Okay.
I just want to encourage the staff to be thinking about the things that were outlined, because I found the letter somewhat compelling, and I want to go to one area that I probably will disagree with what's in the letter, but I wanted to put out those things first that I thought were, gee, it seems like that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm sorry if I misled you on that. There will be a number of value engineering decisions that will have to be made on the project. There always are, and there are many done in this building as well.
usually that means that the price will go up, not down, but I hope that we can push back against it the other way.
No, it will not go up.
Euphemism for cut. No. It's just the opposite here, and there will have to be.
What I would add to Jack's comments, though, is that there is a certain grade and durability that we've put into this building. I mean, I think that when people walk into this building, it's 10 years old. And people sometimes that haven't been here before go, wow, this building looks brand new. And I credit a lot to our maintenance group, right? But I also credit the employees that work here because this is our home and they know what a nice home they have. And when something spills or whatever, they're on the phone to us immediately. And I think what's happened is we haven't had to replace many things. So we've been in this building for 10 years. I would say that the terrazzo flooring, the wood paneling that you see, very low maintenance. Sometimes there's some repair, but hardly any replace. And so this has lasted us. We've got carpet that has a 15-year life cycle. And so what we find is the quality that you put in up front, I think, saves you money on the back end. And what I would say about the O Street project is that they're building a multi-tenanted building with tenants today that may not be the same tenants 5 or 10 years from now. So there's an expectation that those kinds, the finishes they're going to use are going to be probably a shorter lifespan than what we would use, because we know this is a place that CalSTRS is going to be in for the next 30 years, and there's not going to be an additional tenant that's going to be, walking through that building. And our employees know how to take care of good things. So.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I'm probably just going to parrot what Paul already said. The one area that I found less compelling was this idea that we'd somehow start to look at reducing the amount of parking. While nobody knows the future of transportation and whether or not we need those parking spaces, I do believe that we should plan for what we believe we'll need, and to the extent we don't, hopefully we can rent out that parking and not make a judgment at this point that we presumably do know the future. So I'll just say that's the one area that I felt in the memo might have overreached a bit, but I do think it raises some compelling points, and I would just hope staff would take the work that finance did and take it to heart and continue to consider those things. Thank you.
Thank you. So Lisa, I just wanted to follow up on the comment that you just made about when we were looking at the benchmarking between the O Street building and ours. You said that the O Street building is really being built to be multi-tenant, meaning it's a state building, but there will be different agencies, departments coming in there. So is that, not being in the real estate business, is that sort of would an analogy be like if you were building an apartment building versus building a house? And in the apartment building, you're probably going to put in paint, carpet, kitchen stuff that will endure tenants coming in and sort of knowing that you're going to have replacements or fixes along the way versus what you choose to put in your home if hopefully you'll be in that home for a long time. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect analogy. And I'm not saying that the O Street project's not gonna be lovely. They're using the same architect we are. Their architect they're using Seattle, we're using the same architect out of Portland. And in fact, their lobby finishes are very similar to what we're doing in our project as well. I think where it gets different is the fact of where employees actually work. And that's gonna be it's gonna be a great building. I just think that they're not thinking long-term like we are, as far as we're a single tenant, it's going to be a single tenant building. There's going to be nobody but CalSTRS in that building, and we know what we need for our organization to be successful, and that's what we're trying to do is to put those elements in up front, so we don't have any retrofit needs. So I think that's where the upfront costs come.
May I ask one other question?
Absolutely.
So there's also, I think this is part of the benchmarking section of the memo. It's on TRB 11, where you've got a table that compares the O Street project and the CalSTRS project, but looks at it by occupancy.
I'm sorry.
Occupancy. Yeah. So is that because, so it looks like they have estimated 1,300 occupants for the O Street building. We've got 1,200 estimated, but their building's quite a bit larger. So on a per occupant basis, it's about the costs are more equivalent. Is that, so why is that? Why do they estimate that there are going to be so many fewer occupants sort of per square foot compared to what we're estimating for
They're using
our
larger
project?
workstations.
Oh, so we're just putting in,
Yeah, we're considering workstations that are 6 by 6, and I think they're using either 7 by 7 or 8 by 8. So each individual has a larger individual workspace.
We're using a commercial model, not a state government model, for looking at personal office space.